Hello and welcome to another episode of the Beyond Waste podcast. My name is Mark Shayler. I've been working in sustainability and waste for 35 years. I always work with clients and start in the skip. If you look in the skip, you look at the things people are throwing away and you get to see the whole DNA of the organization. And I think the same is true culturally of our country. The stuff that we throw away tells you so much about us. And I'm sat talking to Sid Hande, and Sid can introduce himself in a minute. But I'm already enthralled at the stories he's going to tell us. Having done a little bit of research into what he does, listened to a couple of podcasts he's already done, I'm really excited to have a conversation around community responses to the challenge of waste, and more importantly, community responses to circular economy opportunities. Sid, how are you?
Hi, Mark. Yeah, doing really well. Very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's our treat. Can you introduce yourself? Who are you? What do you do? Why does it matter?
Sure. Hi, my name is Siddharth Hande. I run a company called Kabadiwalla Connect. So we are a for-profit social enterprise that works on the waste collection piece, primarily in the global south. So that's our focus area. Um, we believe very strongly in the power of the informal supply chain. So your waste pickers, your informal aggregators, and the role that they can bring to improving our collection systems in the global south, and really presenting a new model, a more decentralized, community-based approach to waste collection. So yeah, so that's the company I run. I'm a data scientist by training, so a lot of GIS and remote sensing. I worked in the development sector for about 8 years before founding Kabadiwalla Connect. I was able to start the company because we won a couple of grants where we were going to map the informal aggregators active in my city. Where I'm from Chennai, so my hometown. So we wanted to do the census of the supply chain stakeholders and see at an ecosystem level, what is the informal sector? How do we work with them? How are they doing these, this really interesting, they collect a lot of waste, the informal supply chain in the global south, supremely misunderstood. So the act of really mapping that supply chain is how we ultimately arrived at Kabadiwalla Connect as a waste collection tech-enabled business, you could say.
I love that. And of course you do that. This solution could only come from someone that understands GIS and overlaying maps and people. And that's its strength. I can completely see that. And I've only been to India once, and I can't wait to come back. It was one of the most inspiring, amazing trips of my life. I absolutely love this combination of entrepreneurial activity and huge drive for better design, better cities, better move. It was wonderful. So I'm going to come to Chennai and see you when I'm over there next, for certain. Tell me, Sid. Let's go right back to the start. How did you get into data? What was it about you that pulled you into data?
Yeah, it's hard to say. It's actually, I guess I kind of Forrest Gumped it in a way. So when I was growing up, I was very interested in the environment. Like always enjoyed hiking. Chennai is like a city on the beach, so really long stretches of beach. I would spend a lot of time there. For me, after I finished school, I wanted to work in the environment sector first. Like I really wanted to work in like conservation. And so I did a master's in environment and sustainability. But I also realized in my, I did a lot of work, for different organizations active. And I realized like, I'm not a field guy. Like I'm not that guy going out and catching the snakes, you know. And so I think data was a way, like GIS, when I was doing my studies, was really a way. I mean, there's a lot of GIS in forest management. And so the technical work really was from that environmental background. I went on to work in the development sector, and then I was using GIS, especially open source stuff. So this is like 2011, I think 2010, 2011. So a lot of organizations in India where I was trying to apply to didn't have access to ArcGIS and this expensive software. So I actually came quite close to the source of being that person who was helping researchers write up project grants and working on that primary data components. How do you capture spatial data? There was a lot of, what we saw in the development sector is like poorer neighborhoods are really misrepresented or underrepresented. And so I found a real niche and enjoyment in mapping these invisible processes. So I spent, we did some amazing projects when I was in the development sector. One was mapping the local connection between fishing communities and the coastline. And yeah, so also got very interested in counter mapping, this idea, this theoretical concept of deploying the power of maps to tell stories or different stories, pushing that, being able to tell I guess a revisionist perspective on a place. And yeah, and again, always because we spent a lot of time in the beaches in my undergrad here, we had this beach cleanup team called Reclaim Our Beaches that we set up. And so my interest in waste really started from organizing cleanups and having a lot of fun organizing cleanups, realizing that if we were collecting the material on the beach and we're putting it into the municipal bin, it was going to a dump yard that in Chennai is still on marshland. So like our two primary dump sites are in these beautiful marshlands, which are like these bird nesting sites and stuff. So for us, I noticed waste pickers coming and picking up certain material through my lived experience, seeing them sell to these local scrap shops. And then when I was doing my master's, going back and reading theory on the informal sector, felt that these aggregators were really misunderstood, underrepresented. And that's where this idea of mapping the aggregators in my hometown came from. And that's honestly the basis of Kabadiwalla. We still do a lot of mapping. We've done some mapping now in Indonesia and Hong Kong. And the supply chain is honestly the most fascinating, industrious, entrepreneurial, effective collection system that's completely invisible.
I love it. It's more than invisible, isn't it? It's even if it peaks up every now and again, people prefer not to look at it. We don't look at waste. We see it as a real problem, a real challenge, or we see it as beneath us. And if we reframe it, if we take the circular economy approach and we see this as resources, this is, you're picking gold out of those marshes. Maybe not gold, maybe silver, but you're picking stuff out of those marshes. Have you ever mapped the sources of that waste?
Yeah, I mean, we can trace the sources back to a few things. One is maybe I should step back and maybe create a couple of foundational thoughts that we have on the issue of waste. I think one is we see in the global south, like the waste collection system, the traditional waste collection system, this municipal run, centralized kind of model that has over time has actually received a lot of development finance to run it. It's expensive systems, they focus on collection, on like covering all the streets and collecting all that stuff out and keeping the street clean, and then taking all that material to the landfill. And so, some statistics is like over 90% of what the formal sector collects, the waste collection company collects in cities in the global south, it goes to landfills. Even that is too expensive for the city. So even that centralized model is too expensive. And so one of the big sources of waste hotspots or illegal dump sites is the fact that municipality can't handle it and people are making all sorts of decisions on the way to the transfer station and landfill to dump stuff because there's capacity problems, or there's something along that, it's a system that is in crisis. That's one big thing. So, they say there's a World Bank study that says for effective waste management in the global south, this is a study we cite, it can cost the municipality 20 to 50% of its budget. That's impossible. So again, that highlights the crisis. We need to find more effective collection systems that work. And what we see then is this informal sector. And again, I want a big couching on the informal sector is that, 2 billion, the ILO, there's a study which says that 2 billion people work in the informal economy. That's, what is that, over 50% of the world's employed population or something like that. That's a big number. And most of them, it's not just labor, it's also businesses. And so when you think of supply chains, different supply chains that has a lot of informal work, recycling is a very traditional supply chain.
Yeah.
Some big issues around this, health and safety, massive issue. People every day make decisions between their health and livelihood and their income. And so, it's a big scavenging. How do you work on this issue of waste pickers actually scavenging for material? But then it also has strengths because, ever since the 50s and 60s, and this is something our data, we have some insights on this now. Ever since the 50s and 60s, people have understood that there's a lot of value in that waste that's going to the landfill, and they've tried to extract it. So waste pickers extract it by picking up material, but also local neighborhoods like segregate the material and sell it to their local scrap shop. And what we found in Chennai when we mapped in 2017, I think 2017 or 2018, was in Chennai, the municipality, there was about 2,000 scrap shops all across the city that were buying from waste pickers as well as the local neighborhoods. They were then selling to these 300 informal material recovery facilities. And the ecosystem was collecting 130,000 tons of material every year. So
130,000.
25% or 24% of what the city generates 540,000 tons of recyclables. This supply chain, just by itself, just organically, just set up, representing key infrastructure, waste pickers walking on the streets, local neighborhoods going to their local scrap shop, trucks taking this material, balers, sites where stuff is stored. They were collecting 24%, about 40,000 tons of paper. So paper and metal really was where the supply chain started, where there was value. But then plastics in India, especially PET and your PP, the thicker the rigids, are very valuable. So they have a big market. And so PET, it's hyper collected, like over 95% of PET is collected when you look at generation versus how much is being collected. And they do it in a decentralized way. So small scrap shops are around, all small collection, radiuses. A lot of people working on it, ensuring quality, and they all follow a mass balance system. There's like weighing scales and bills are the foundation of this. Like when a waste picker goes to a scrap shop, they get a bill, they get paid. When a community member goes there, they get a bill, they get paid. There's a weighing scale. So they follow this quite a complex mass balance system, which they have to and that's one of the reasons why they're so successful in collecting more. And they can collect a lot more. That's also what we saw. Like if you were able to give them like financial instruments, incentives to improve their health and safety. Like we really believe in the power of this supply chain to articulate like a global South response to the circular economy. Hey guys, this is how it could look. And these supply chains that I'm speaking about, it's not just in India, it's in Southeast Asia. I know it's in Latin America. In fact, Latin America is a lot we can learn from them because they do some really good enumeration and building a lot of really interesting frameworks, especially on the integration into social packages and things like that. There are really some amazing things going on.
We'll come back to
Africa.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say so 2 big points of departure: waste collection. The formal system is in crisis and landfilling. And so for us, looking at this informal supply chain that is set up over time and trying to leverage their use technology, use better business process, that's where we want to set up our base and hopefully in the process help integrate the supply chain holistically. I'm happy to talk about some examples on that. I can say we're very much doing pilots. So we've moved from grants to, you could say, commercial pilots. But again, scale for us would be to get a long-term offtake agreement or a long-term traceability agreement. And it's a really interesting piece because it at the heart of this is these really big companies need to start trusting this supply chain. And I think I was just reading in the UK this idea of like smaller microbreweries and how do you trust that system to get particular levels of quality. And there is something about, do you trust a centralized process or do you trust a decentralized process? And I think if we help through data and all of these things articulate why you can trust this supply chain. And also, by the way, like they have to do something. Like if they want to get their hands dirty and work, you have to engage with these stakeholders. So that's where I see if we're able to build a broader consensus around the power of the informal supply chain, it could be really, really exciting.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it does rest on trust. So trust in 2 ways, I think, or maybe even 3 ways. So the power of the supply chain is incredible because it's so big and so flexible and can switch material or switch geography really quickly. You can turn those switches on and off and divert them. I guess the trust comes in, firstly, quality of material. How do we ensure quality of material? Because that's the next part of the change job, I suspect. And then trust in terms of the regulatory part of this, the duty of care part of this. How do we ensure that the legislation is in place? And then there's trust in terms of the financial side of this. How do we go about enhancing trust in those three areas?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Um, so you said quality.
Quality, regulation, i.e., not dumping things that are less
Yeah,
valuable somewhere else,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then the financial side. So
yeah,
you're not
yeah,
ripping off the pickers.
yeah,
So you've
yeah,
got these 300. I'll call
yeah,
them MRFs, but 300 MRFs aren't paying too little for the people really adding value here.
yeah. I think, yeah, great question, because I think there's a lot of things, but I want to speak to the key things that we believe. One is digitalization, traceability. Um, Traceability, I think, and along with traceability, a certification process. I think these two, if we're able to articulate, like, what does it mean for like a big company's compliance framework, and they point to X, Y, and Z. Like Shell, for example, pointed us to the IOGP framework, the International Oil and Gas Producers like life-saving rules. And so we looked at those rules and then looked at the small scrap shop, looked at the informal material recovery facility,
Mm-hmm.
looked at the waste picker, and you can start transcribing this to what would it mean. And of course, at scale, it would mean a lot of big changes, like waste pickers need to go directly and pick up from households and not scavenge. There's a lot of big changes, but you can articulate that step-by-step map of how would you do that, and you can have certain key crossings. You can't have children as part of the supply chain. Like, you know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
transcribing, I think, is a key part of the trust process. If they were to open up and say, okay, we have this certification system. Show me this supply chain and show me how you're going to build compliance in site and labor safety, and show me exactly what that is, And with regards to quality, traceability then plays that key role, mass balance traceability. Now, I think traceability it's a very exciting, very doable piece because, like I said, these folks are already buying and selling using a general ledger system. So all we have to do is listen to them and see how do they buy and sell material, and then keep that framework while transcribing that taxonomy to a formal industry. And we've seen a lot of very interesting cases here. Like, for example, in Chennai, they call rigid PP and PE Bombay plastic. And
Yeah.
it's always a 50-50 mix. So Bombay plastic means something to the recycler, means something different to the EPR agency. So it's about translating that. But I believe if you were able to do that, and then it's a very powerful thing because they have a philosophy of working with mass balance anyway. So you get really interesting. Again, quality, it's like we're doing NIR scanners versus human hands in this case. You know what I mean? So or human eyes. Like so quality is really high here. If you want to get like the bottle cap taken out from the PET bottle, you can incentivize for that. You can provide a safe environment for that to happen. Yeah, so regulation again comes from, I feel, transcribing this and having a very trust-based approach on how are we investing into the supply chain and building that compliance over time. Finances, again, tied to the traceability system. It's also kind of a moment in the global south where everybody is quite versatile with digital payment mechanisms. Like Google Pay in India is, I mean, people are selling coconuts on the street and taking money with Google Pay. You know what I mean? So,
Amazing.
I just want to like, the waste pickers, they're still in that super ultra poor category. You have to make it easy for them. There's a lot of hand holding there. But the scrap shops, these little scrap shops that they're loyal to, that they're buying material from, that's where you can do an enrollment campaign. That's where you can find where these folks are, get them, identity cards, get them state sponsored health insurance. And really that's where you build that framework. So you see the scrap shops and especially the informal MRFs, like these informal MRFs, they're like serious places, 5,000, 10,000 square foot, high tension lines, balers, yeah, you a point of sale device and a Bluetooth weighing scale can get you super far in extremely high tech traceability. So I think traceability, a certification system that values upstream information. Right now, you have recyclers that just focus on their site and everything upstream is this black box. But that's changing. There are certification systems that value upstream, and brands can put premiums for that upstream data. I think all of these things can really help build that trust process. Um, I think the recycler, I see one, of course, there are a lot of bottlenecks in this. And I think one big one is the way recyclers are used to doing business, because a lot of the technologies that are coming to the global south, like they have some presence or have some pre-financing in Europe. There's a lot of innovation in Europe and the UK on waste management, high processing tech. So I do see a lot of localization required from that. Like typically stuff is too big when it comes here. You want to do a 10,000 ton plant, you might have a better ROI if it's like 2,000 tons and like multiple sites. You know what I mean? So I see a lot of small bottlenecks. And one of the big ones comes from, how do you say, giving flowers to the way the informal sector has set up, and acknowledging them and working with them. They need their flowers. And so people still come with the mindset that like, oh, I have to greenfield everything. I have to build the MRFs. I have to do this. I have to do everything. And it becomes crazy. Whereas we're trying to talk a brownfield story and retrofit, like, hey, go and retrofit this informal MRF, like, put like a air, like air filtration that really improves the air quality there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That's really interesting. And, your background of understanding the tech overlay here with the and I'm not going to call it blockchain because we've nudged blockchain, but we haven't gone into blockchain yet. But as a solution, as a way of making these things work more seamlessly, and then interlocking that with Google Pay and modern methods of payment that are pre-blockchain, that's really interesting as well, because we can build in equity and reward in a way that we couldn't before. We can see through supply chains. And it also interests me, the data that you're collecting here is really valuable. How do you begin to set up a second business? You may have done this already, a second business that is selling data rather than selling resources.
Yeah, data is like, when we think of the products that we offer, and just given our specialty, like data is always the first point of departure between a commercial client and ourselves, because it's all about a recognition from the client that, yeah, what we're describing, there's something going on in my supply chain that's similar to this. We need to understand it. Can we map? And then on top of that, we're able to offer then, because of the data collection does a few things. It creates a spatial data infrastructure. So where are these folks? And I mean, you can do really complex things if you wanted. You can build agent-based models and like visualize, how much more could they collect, and what's the cost to the municipality. And there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do when the GIS data is in place. But then the attribute data is all around what materials do you collect, what's your price point, how do you valorize this across the supply chain, where are the key nodes. There's a lot of that kind of stuff that is pretty foundational. One is if you're interested in policy, like specific policy making, like or if you're a recycler interested in securing feedstock or setting up a plant. So data is quite foundational to building a relationship with a client. But then on top of that, if we're not in India, we primarily focus on traceability. And again, it's this kind of white labeled approach to traceability. Our primary goal is to understand the operations of the informal sector and create a layer that allows for that data to be represented across the architecture. And then if people want to put it on blockchain, yeah, we partner up with them. If people want to do different things with it, our goal is really the informal sector friendly part of the digitalization. Because especially at the informal MRFs, these are serious places. There's like 50 to 100 tons of material being sold. There's a clear process that they already have. So it's really about unpacking that and building a solution that works for the informal sector, which is our strength. Like, how do you deploy tech at the level 1 or the level 2 aggregator. That's where kind of we excel. But then in terms of ecosystem services or deployed services, we're always happy to white label. So if there's, but I have a caveat on blockchain also. Like we see a lot of companies where, blockchain works when everybody trusts in that system and there's a lot of transactions happening within that system. You know what I mean? So to build trust, you have to first see what works. And so that's what we believe works is the old school general ledger system, which they already have been working on, utilizing their weighing scales and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I think for us, traceability is a key service we can do, like baked in with the mapping. In India, we're really focused on procurement guarantees. Like, so if we can get a long-term offtake agreement, and be able to raise money to invest in compliance ourselves, because the economics of the whole thing work. That's when I feel like we will be in our next phase of maturity in the concept, because at that point there's a lot of people locked in. Like a big brand has said, yeah, let's do a long-term offtake, do this, do that, and over time you invest in the system to see what it gives you. So that's where we would love to be.
No, I can see that. That makes perfect sense to me and builds on your skills and strengths. And just quickly, you mentioned earlier that you're learning from Latin America in relation to sort of the social purpose side of things. Can you expand on that a little?
I'm not an expert, but what I know just from the lived experience is when we look at data collection on the informal sector, waste pickers, and government strategies of formalizing or recognizing them. There's a lot of depth in Latin America on that topic. I think India, but again, it's kind of like this porous. I mean, we were in Sri Lanka recently, and the waste pickers there were on cycles, and they had this little like a megaphone, and that was talking in the words, and like it's like a shared audio recording that all the waste pickers have talking about materials. And so I feel like, yeah, the lived experience of these different supply chains, there's so much to learn from so many different people. Like if I were to look at India, it's like more dense, like more waste pickers walking the streets. Indonesia, more people on motorized tricycles, So there's a lot to learn from everybody, but I definitely feel Latin America has the government, like when you look at the policy response, there's a deep empathy and appreciation for the power of the supply chain. And that is emerging in other places, but definitely there's a lot to learn from Latin America.
That's amazing. And how do you want, well, okay, we'll go back. So how do you work with other countries? How are you working with other projects? Do you all play really nicely, or is there a form of competition? And particularly maybe within India itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's waste collection, waste management is a pretty active space. Very few serious clients out, so it's a tough space. Like it's definitely a tough space. Our approach is probably best suited for big companies who have a strategic problem. So thousands and thousands or hundreds and thousands of tons. And nothing with EPR is ever enough. You have to go to the source of the waste collection issue. And so for us, our ideal state of waste collection is where a small scrap shop and their waste pickers are deployed to collect over 5 streets. They actually get the approval of the municipality, and they're actually working in a harmonized system, multiple actors across multiple streets collecting multiple streams and getting it into different places. And we believe it's possible. Like in Chennai, we've had this pilot now for 3 years where one scrap shop, 2 waste pickers have been deployed into the community to pick up and have actually formed a schedule around it, like a proper schedule. And they never miss a day. Like you can prove that it's something that you can depend on them for. So typically, like when we get called up, it's like a brand who has a strategic problem and has maybe invested in recycling technology already and has done a lot of work, but then is struggling on this issue of feedstock and compliance in that feedstock supply chain. and how do you scale up volumes to feed my 10,000 ton plant? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where how we've been called up. So big companies, yeah, big companies looking at who have some understanding on recycling technologies and also the manufacturing process that they want to employ. But then there's that key question of feedstock and scaling up that feedstock and things like that. Yeah, that's where we typically find a really sweet spot. That's one. The second is more on the policy side, where we can get called up to really support like a policy paper or something very serious on that, let's say an EPR consultation or something like that, where the data is a key role that, plays a key role in the report that's being published and so on and so forth.
That's really interesting. And I guess in any other, well, in most other countries, you would have a local authority or a public sector involvement in waste collection. And in India, that's not the case at all, right?
In the global south, yeah, like municipal. So this is the foundational different starting point, different page between Europe, like, and the UK and India, which is everybody, there's something functioning top down, and it's the council and the municipality, and nothing would work if they weren't doing something. And so it's all about regulations. How can we do this and that? And it's kind of that conversation. Whereas here it's like nothing works, but then there's this supply chain that's like doing something. How do we support it? How do we get people to talk to each other? Like, so yeah, you don't really, it's the councils are, you bring them in as an observer or a in the global south. And this is different places, Indonesia, a few other places where it's very commercially driven. And so recyclers are talking to the recyclers have to fend for themselves in the global south. And so they have to do these deals with these aggregators, and they have. I mean, Indonesia, PET recycling is 20 years old or 30 years old, and so paper is part of. There are a lot of global supply chains actually tied to how this informal sector. Like you can draw a straight line from PET collection from my neighborhood to a T-shirt with Quicksilver or Adidas saying that this was made out of like 5 PET bottles, basically.
That's really interesting, isn't it? So is there, I mean, building on that and the kind of consumer awareness of products that have come from a circular source, is there an interest within the consumer body in India for recycled materials, for environmentalism, for want of another word? And how is that affecting demand for materials?
Yeah, I think a global demand is really driving a lot of the narrative here still. It's really the big companies. Like there's a lot of regulations coming up that big companies are looking at how to manage these supply chains that they've set up in the global south. So I think that's a big driver for folks, and like if a digitalization law comes up and it's part of my global supply chain, what do I do in this case or that case, and things like that. I was part of this panel. It's a India government kind of panel on standardization. And there was this genuine concern that there's a lot of greenwashing, like bio bag, like monolayer plastic was banned, for example, and then these bio bags. So there's a lot of issue, like, so, certification can be a lot better in India is what I say. And there's a concern about greenwashing and about more harm coming into the environment. There's also more research on microplastics and all of this kind of stuff. But I feel a really important demand is coming from the big global supply chains trying to build increased compliance into their supply chains. And if they were to buy pellets in Gujarat, how can I certify that RPET, in Europe? And that's, so I think that there's still this kind of north-south pull on like where it's coming from, but that's a good thing, like, because like a lot of big brands, Unilever, there are a lot of big brands that have a massive presence in the global south, and they can really do a lot, and they kind of know what's going on. Also, they know that to be piecemeal about it is putting them in a position where they have to, it's not solving the problem. So they are interested in waste collection, for example, like this problem of waste collection. Yeah, but it's also everybody has to put the right pressure. EPR is seen, I think, as a serious vehicle for injecting finance into waste collection and waste management. in the global south. Like it's being seen as a key resource, a key way. I think, me personally, I think this is like EPR needs to come in and bring finance to improve waste collection and waste recycling services in the global south. So there's a back and forth on that for sure.
And do you think that the injection of cash from the brands into informal waste collection, do you think that will flow through to normal people?
I believe, I, I believe the opportunity to improve the lives of waste pickers and scrap shops and informal MRFs, if the brands get it right, is really transformational. Especially if you put in traceability and certification systems at the heart of it. Because I think there's just so much that you can do. Like, right now, when we look at the data, like, one thing that we have started trying out is these little scrap shops that are all across every neighborhood in the city. What if we did pop-ups with them? And if 50% of all the scrap shops in Chennai did like pop-ups on a Saturday and a Sunday, we're suddenly talking about another like 20,000 tons of material coming in. It's the opportunity to leapfrog and do something very powerful on the collection side, I think is really, I mean, if we're able to articulate the right approach for a big brand, it's an amazing story. Every small scrap shop is, a circular job, and they represent infrastructure and capacity to organize the collection of waste at the local level. Like when we talk to Shell, they're interested in, like, let's say, rigid PP for Shell lubricants, but they're also interested in used cooking oil for technologies that they're like, investing in. So when when you look at the scaling potential of working with this untapped local aggregator who's so retail oriented, like they have for 15 years been accepting clients into their shops and selling material. So I think if brands think of the supply chain and leveraging them in unique ways, you can really see some kind of transformational stuff that can also then, you could say, inspire the municipality and the other players to take them more seriously and incorporate them into waste collection. Because that's the demand, like people want to do something, especially on plastics. Low value plastic is a huge burning issue. Like when you talk to the community here, like the associations, the apartment associations, they really know they hate that low value plastic, not being recycled. Why doesn't the Kabadiwalla take the low value plastic? And so, instead of thinking of a MRF and then working with waste, because what if you thought of getting the community to their local scrap shop and doing these pop-ups? And there's like so many other ways of leveraging and integrating the supply chain. I think we're still stuck in this. Like it's kind of like I don't even understand it. Like nobody believes it. Like like it's not only waste pickers picking up and then something magical happens and 95% of the PET gets collected. There's aggregators, there's valorizers, there's so much stuff going on, but we're not looking at working with them holistically. And I think there are so many opportunities to try different things that would actually, make the way we would do it here a very interesting, a compelling case for the collection of circular, the collection models around circular economy. Because the starting points are very different, like when you look at waste, I think waste has always been a resource in India. Like it was found organically by this group of businesses that then set up, and the way they've done it is very different from a top-down regulated way. And I think that there's a lot to learn where when you put materials and their value at the heart of the equation, you know what I mean? Like why are they decentralized? Because waste pickers and community, you need a certain level of volume at the scrap shop before it makes sense to put it on that truck and then send it to the informal MRF. And then you need a certain amount of volume there and you need to bail it, or you need some value add there. And so they've kind of figured out how everybody in the supply chain makes money. The interesting thing I think with the informal sector is like they're very good with valuable stuff like paper, metal, thicker plastics. With the lower value plastics, there's no intrinsic value there that anybody can exploit. Somebody has to pay the delta in what it costs to manage it. Yeah. And so that's the next step, I feel, of working with this supply chain.
No, I can see that. I can see where you'll go there. I'm really interested, and maybe we end on this. I'm really interested in what happens after you've aggregated, you've sorted, you've valorized, and then you're selling. Is there a next step, which is a conversion of raw materials in inverted commas into industrial feedstock? So you're adding an
Yeah,
extra set of value after waste.
sure. Yeah, I mean, for sure. Like, and this is where again, it's not starting from zero. Like a lot of big companies have invested in really interesting technology. Like Shell made a investment in Blue Alps technology, this
Hmm.
pyrolysis method. Um, And I mean, if that, I mean, theoretically, that could be replacement for virgin oil in their big fractors potentially. So the case for, I mean, of course, you have to look at the whole spectrum. Of course, I'm in that recycling zone, but I'm saying theoretically, like we could, if you look at PET as a lead indicator, you could achieve the same thing for all plastics if you get the incentives right.
Yeah.
And this is all part of industrial feedstock. This is not upcycle. All the stuff that these guys collect is not for upcycling or anything like that. It's all industrial feedstock. And so, yes, for sure, we believe this supply chain is the beating heart on the collection of industrial feedstock. And of course can also play a huge role in local waste collection. Like they could be employed to get the compost to the micro composting center, for example,
Yeah.
and so I think there's a lot of opportunities for integrations at that local level.
I can see so, because then it becomes beyond waste, and it becomes economic development that is growth oriented rather than problem sorting oriented. And that, to me, when I look at the future of the world, when I look at the way that economic and manufacturing power is drifting east, it's going to come back to Africa and India. We know this. We know the future is Africa and India. There's no two ways about that. And I find this really exciting. And ironically, it's from sending loads of stuff to you for the wrong reasons, and also domestically generated waste as well. Can you just give me a quick view of whether you're really optimistic about the future, whether you think whether you think there's opportunity to flourish as a nation, and how we move from waste to wealth?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think that's another great question. For me, it's true that when you look at the numbers, like India, I think generates 70 million tons of waste, and in like 20 years, they'll be generating 150 million tons.
Yeah,
So
incredible. Yeah.
there's going to be this massive middle class spending power. Like people can see that. That's writing on the wall in some way. And so, like when we first started out, um, the contention was in municipal waste. There's 2% was textile waste. Now in a government panel, we were informed that it's 15% with fast fashion coming in. So with modernization, I think like and spending power and economic power is going to be this spending thing that like I mean when we look at like something that I get afraid of is like Swiggy and these last mile delivery apps. There's so much packaging in these last mile delivery apps,
Yeah.
and we're getting hooked on it, and it's just starting. Like so I think the amount of waste. So here's my feeling: like, the amount of waste we generate is gonna whatever quadruple, whatever the number is, proportional to making more money. Our current waste collection systems, like if they don't articulate a new approach, I mean, it's going to be on the mind of every Indian who, how do you talk when your streets are full of rubbish and your rivers are full of rubbish? Isn't that a cognitive dissonance for your modernization narrative? And so again, you can see the government would really look at this issue. But again, I think the missing piece is believing in what's happening locally and supporting the local scene. Like imagine if every cleanup, like, India does 200,000 cleanups. Imagine if every cleanup there was a scrap shop that was also invited to be a partner and would buy the recyclable material that they will only buy stuff in cleanups that they know they can sell into the industrial feedstock supply chain. We've done these kind of, experiments, and there's a lot of recyclable waste that you can do in cleanups. So we're not really leveraging like innovation in thinking about this crisis. And I hope we do. Like I'm hopeful that we should. I believe the work we do in terms of mapping these supply chains and modeling future scenarios and I hope that there's a strong story there that will tie up. I do believe that at the local level it works.
Yeah.
Like the association is so happy when a scrap shop comes to the apartment. We've done a lot of events now, and so we can attest to that. But then, how do we then take that idea and then translate that into in schools teaching about your local scrap shop, your Kabadiwalla, as it were, or your Kailan Cadet? Like, how many steps do we need to go from school curriculum teaching every student about, hey, segregate at home and go to your local scrap shop and sell that material, and how do you bring this ideas and these frameworks into the foreground? How do we not be passive about, we shouldn't speak too big and then like just look outside for solutions. I feel like we need to look internally for our solutions. So I hope we're able to do that. And I hope data, I think data can be a big part of telling that story and building that narrative.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, look, I love what you do. I love the way you do it. I'm really pleased that you exist and that you're growing. But I'm not surprised, Sid. You're incredibly intelligent, entrepreneurial, and I think the future is in safe hands. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Mark. It's a pleasure.